Welcome to the Sleepy Scientist. Tonight we're going to explore something truly extraordinary, something so strange, so mysterious, and so quietly mind-bending that it might just keep you up a little later than planned. And if it does, well, at least you'll have something fascinating to think about while you wait for sleep to catch up with you. Now, before we drift too far from shore, I'd like to gently ask for a small favour. If you enjoy these calming explorations and find yourself returning night after night, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing. It helps more sleepy minds find their way here, and it means the world to me. Also, I'm always curious, where in the world are you listening from? Maybe you're snuggled up in a quiet room in rural Canada, or perhaps you're in a cozy apartment high above a bustling city in Japan. Wherever you are, I'd love to know your location and the local time as you listen. Feel free to leave a comment below, especially if you're listening at an odd hour. You won't be alone. Tonight's journey is called The Illusion of Reality, and we'll be floating gently through the wondrous and often bewildering ways your brain constructs the world around you. Because the truth is, you're not directly experiencing reality itself. You're experiencing a beautifully orchestrated version of it, woven together by your senses, memories, expectations, and a generous helping of creative guesswork. From the tricks your eyes play on you, to the strange ways your memories rewrite themselves, to the elusive nature of consciousness itself, we'll be exploring the idea that much of what feels solid and true is, in fact, a remarkably convincing illusion. An illusion so immersive that we rarely notice it's there at all. But don't worry, we won't be falling too far down the philosophical rabbit hole, just far enough to make you marvel at the strange and wonderful machine between your ears, and if somewhere along the way your eyes start to feel heavy and your thoughts begin to blur at the edges, then you're in exactly the right place. Please remember, everything in this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing here is intended as medical or psychological advice. Always speak to a qualified professional if you have concerns about your mental or neurological health. Now close your eyes if you like, take a slow, steady breath, and let's begin. Your brain is not a camera. It's not even close. It doesn't record the world like a camcorder or a high-resolution GoPro. Instead, it builds a convincing illusion of reality using whatever scraps of sensory information it can gather. Then it fills in the rest with educated guesses, old memories, and just a touch of imagination. Every second of your waking life, your brain is constructing a mental model of what it thinks is happening out there in the world. But here's the twist. That model is not the world itself. It's a simulation. A very convincing one, yes, but a simulation nonetheless. You are living inside a brain-generated virtual reality, tailored specifically to you. Think of your senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell as the input cables. They feed electrical signals into your brain, but those signals are meaningless without interpretation. The real work, the creative part, is what your brain does with those signals after they arrive. It decodes, filters, reinterprets, compares, and predicts. In many cases, it fills in gaps where data is missing, which, as it turns out, is most of the time. Let's take vision, for example. When light enters your eyes, it hits the retina, where special cells turn that light into electrical signals. Those signals are sent along the optic nerve to the back of your brain, to a region called the visual cortex. From there, your brain begins to piece together the shape, colour, distance, and motion of what it thinks you're seeing. But here's the kicker. Your eyes actually have a blind spot, an area where the optic nerve connects that has no photoreceptors at all. You are literally missing information right in the middle of your field of view, and yet you don't see a dark hole floating around in your vision, do you? That's because your brain simply fills it in, using nearby colours and patterns. It guesses, seamlessly, effortlessly. You don't notice the difference. This guesswork extends far beyond blind spots. Your brain is constantly anticipating what should be there. In fact, some neuroscientists believe that vision is mostly prediction. not passive reception. The brain sends its predictions down from higher regions to lower regions, and only when the prediction doesn't match the incoming data does it stop to correct itself. This system, called predictive coding, helps you navigate the world smoothly and efficiently, even when sensory data is ambiguous or incomplete. Imagine you're walking into your kitchen at night. It's dark. You can barely see anything, but you still know where the counter is, where the fridge should be, even how far the floor is below your feet. You don't need perfect visual input. Your brain simply fills in the missing details based on memory and context. In many cases, it doesn't even wait for confirmation. It just assumes. This is why optical illusions are so delightfully unsettling. They reveal the predictive machinery at work. The Mueller-Lyer illusion, for instance, tricks your brain into thinking two lines are different lengths, even though they're the same. Or take the famous rotating mask illusion. Your brain insists the concave face is convex because it is wired to expect faces to bulge outward. When the data conflicts with expectation, the illusion wins. In a way, your brain would rather be wrong with confidence than admit it doesn't know what's going on. And it's not just vision. All your senses rely on the brain's ability to interpret imperfect data. Sound waves, for example, are just changes in air pressure. Your ears detect those vibrations, and your brain turns them into footsteps, laughter, music, or a barking dog. But again, this is interpretation. Your brain uses timing, location, past experience, and pattern recognition to figure out what you're hearing. One of the more curious side effects of this system is something called the phantom phone vibration. Have you ever thought your phone buzzed in your pocket only to discover it hadn't? That's your brain filling in a sensation it expected to feel, even when the signal never arrived. It predicted a vibration and ran with it. The same sort of shortcut making helps explain how we move through the world, without constantly tripping over our own feet. Your body sends information from muscles, joints, and skin, but your brain doesn't wait for confirmation before you step. It uses a forward model. It predicts what the sensation of lifting your foot and shifting your weight should feel like, and only adjusts if something seems off. This helps you walk fluidly rather than moving like a stop-motion puppet. Of course, this predictive system isn't perfect. Sometimes your brain gets it hilariously wrong. Consider the rubber hand illusion. In this experiment, a participant's real hand is hidden from view, while a fake rubber hand is placed in front of them. Both the real and rubber hands are stroked with a brush at the same time. After a short while, many people begin to feel as though the rubber hand is their own. The brain, seeing the brush on the rubber hand and feeling the touch on the real hand, concludes they must be the same thing. It updates your body model accordingly. Voila! You adopt a new plastic limb without question. This ability to remap and reinterpret extends beyond the body. It's part of how you understand space itself. Your brain doesn't just record where objects are, it creates a working model of your environment. You don't see a cup on a table, you experience the cup on the table within reach. That reachability is part of the perception. Your brain encodes affordances, what actions are possible in a given environment. This means you don't just see what is, you see what can be done. And if you're wondering how your brain juggles all this without turning into a tangled mess of noise and confusion, the answer lies in its extraordinary ability to filter. At any given moment, your senses are bombarded with millions of bits of information, but you consciously notice only a tiny fraction. You might not hear the hum of your refrigerator until it turns off. You probably weren't aware of the feeling of your shirt on your shoulders until just now. That's your brain doing some very elegant housekeeping, discarding what it deems irrelevant so you can focus on what matters. This filtering is handled largely by the thalamus, often described as the brain's relay station. It decides which signals are important enough to be passed on to higher brain areas. Combined with your prefrontal cortex, which governs attention and executive function, the brain curates your moment-to-moment experience. You're not experiencing everything. You're experiencing a highlight reel carefully tailored to your needs. Now, this idea that the world you experience is not the world itself, but a simulation generated by your brain, might sound unsettling, but really it's a marvel of efficiency and adaptability. You don't need to process every photon, every molecule of air, every vibration. You just need a usable model, something close enough to reality to keep you alive and functioning. And your brain is brilliant at making it feel seamless. It stitches together sight and sound and sensation with such ease that you rarely question it. It creates a sense of continuity, of presence, of now, even though your senses all work at different speeds. Did you know it takes longer for sound to reach your brain than light? But your brain synchronizes them anyway, making it seem as though they arrive together. This is why even a tiny delay in audio and video on a call can feel so jarring. The illusion breaks. The mind's finely tuned orchestra hits a sour note, and suddenly you're aware that you're not hearing reality. You're hearing a lacking version of it. But don't worry. Most of the time your brain is so good at managing these illusions that you go through life without noticing the seams. And that's the point. A good illusionist never reveals the trick. The fact that reality feels smooth and intuitive is proof of how well the system works. So while it might be true that you're living in a kind of self-generated virtual reality, that doesn't make your experience any less real. After all, what is real if not what you perceive, think, and feel? Reality, in the end, is what your brain makes of it. And if that idea doesn't send your mind gently tumbling into dreams, it just might give it something lovely to drift toward. Your eyes may be windows to the soul, but they are not windows to the world. Not in the way we usually think, at least. If they were, you'd be getting a continuous high-definition feed of your surroundings, like a camera capturing the world with perfect clarity. But what you actually see is far stranger and more creative. It's not just what hits your retina, it's what your brain expects to see. You might imagine your visual system as a neutral observer, quietly recording whatever's out there. In reality, it's more like an editor with strong opinions, a limited budget, and a tight deadline. Let's begin with the basics. Vision starts when light enters your eye, passes through the lens, and hits the retina at the back. There, specialized cells called rods and cones translate light into electrical signals. These signals travel along the optic nerve and arrive at the visual cortex, located at the back of your brain in the occipital lobe. Simple enough, right? But here's where things get strange. You'd think that the information goes in a straight line, eye to brain to image. Not quite. The visual cortex doesn't just take in raw data, it actively reconstructs a picture of the world, layering in memory, context, assumptions, and predictions. What you see isn't just a reflection of what's out there, it's a mental construction, a story your brain is telling itself about what it thinks is out there. Consider this. Every time your eyes move, and they move a lot, about 3 to 4 times every second, you technically go blind. These rapid eye movements, called saccades, happen so fast that the image on your retina becomes blurred and useless during the motion. But you don't notice this. You don't perceive a moment of darkness or a blur. Your brain quietly edits out the disruption and stitches your visual field back together again, like a film editor smoothing over a jump cut. You experience a continuous, seamless world because your brain fills in the gaps without consulting you. And while we're on the subject of gaps, remember that each of your eyes has a literal blind spot where the optic nerve exits the retina. There are no photoreceptors there at all. No rods, no cones, no visual data coming in. But you don't see a black hole floating in your vision. Your brain simply invents content to go in that spot, using patterns, colours, and textures from the surrounding area. It doesn't ask your permission, and it doesn't flag it as made up. It just quietly smooths the wallpaper of your perception and carries on. This might sound like a bug in the system, but it's actually a feature. The visual system isn't designed for perfect accuracy. It's designed for usefulness. Your brain doesn't need to know every photon that bounced off every surface. It needs just enough information to help you navigate, recognize danger, locate food, and if necessary, spot your phone from across the room before it buzzes off the table. That's why context plays such a huge role in what you see. Take the classic example of color perception. You might think the color of an object is a stable feature. An apple is red, grass is green. But your perception of color is relative. It depends on lighting, surrounding colors, and expectations. A shadow falling across a surface doesn't make you see it as a different object. Your brain corrects for lighting automatically. That's what made the dress go viral. The infamous photo where some people saw a white and gold dress, while others swore it was blue and black. The image itself wasn't changing, but people's brains were correcting for different lighting conditions. Each person was seeing what their brain thought the lighting must be, and adjusted the colours accordingly. This automatic correction is often invisible until it isn't. Consider the checker shadow illusion by Edward Adelson. Two squares, one in shadow and one in light, appear to be different shades of grey. But when you isolate them, they're exactly the same. Your brain has been correcting for the shadow without telling you. It assumes that a square in shadow must actually be lighter than it looks, and adjusts your perception to match. It's not trying to fool you, it's trying to help. It's trying to present a more consistent, more useful world, even if it has to invent a few things along the way. Now let's talk about faces. Humans are face-detecting machines. We are so wired to recognize faces that we see them everywhere. In clouds, in toast, in the front of a car. This phenomenon, called pareidolia, is a testament to just how deeply embedded facial recognition is in the brain. We have a specialized area for it too, the fusiform face area, or FFA, nestled in the temporal lobe. It lights up not just when you see actual faces, but sometimes even when you think you see one. That's why a rock formation can seem like it's smiling at you, and why emojis work even though they're literally just punctuation marks rearranged into suggestive shapes. Facial perception is also incredibly fast and emotionally charged. You can detect a threatening expression in under 200 milliseconds, often before you're consciously aware of it. Your brain gives priority to faces because social interactions depend on them. A tiny twitch of an eyebrow or a slight curve of the lips can convey sarcasm, affection, suspicion, or disdain. And your brain doesn't just passively receive these cues, it interprets them. It tries to infer intention, mood, and meaning, all in a blink. Often it's right. Occasionally it's hilariously wrong, but it always tries. This interpretive flair is why you can't always trust what you see, especially when you're tired, frightened, or expecting something unusual. In low-light conditions, your brain becomes even more reliant on predictions. That's when jackets on chairs start to look like lurking figures, and shadows seem to shift just out of view. Your brain is attempting to make sense of vague inputs, leaning heavily on past experience and emotional context. In uncertain situations, it tends to err on the side of caution. It's evolution's way of saying, better to mistake a stick for a snake than the other way around. One of the more fascinating quirks of vision is change blindness. This is when a change occurs in your visual field, but you fail to notice it because your attention is elsewhere. In experiments, people have been shown two nearly identical images alternating rapidly, with one small change between them, like a missing lamppost or a rearranged bookshelf. Even though the change happens in plain sight, it can take people several seconds to spot it. In some cases, they never notice it at all. Your brain assumes that the world is relatively stable, and unless you're actively focused on a particular detail, it doesn't bother updating your internal model. Attention is a key player here. You only consciously see what you're paying attention to. Everything else is either processed peripherally or ignored entirely. This is partly a bandwidth issue. Your brain simply can't process everything at once. But it's also strategic. You're not meant to be overwhelmed by every flicker of light or every passing shadow. Your brain filters out the noise, highlights the signal, and keeps the show running smoothly. Now, while all this might make it sound like your visual experience is a patchwork of hallucination, It's important to remember just how good the brain is at what it does. Yes, it makes assumptions. Yes, it sometimes gets things wrong. But most of the time it gets things very, very right. You catch a ball without calculating vectors. You spot a friend in a crowd before your conscious mind catches up. You drive through complex environments without analysing every leaf and lamppost. And yet, even with all this efficiency, your visual system remains a fertile ground for surprises. Optical illusions, mirages, and ambiguous images reveal the inner workings of the system in action. They're not just party tricks, they're windows into the machinery behind the curtain. They show you how much of what you see is shaped not by the eyes, but by the brain. Even dreams, which unfold entirely in the absence of real visual input, borrow heavily from your brain's visual library. You see places you've never been, faces you've never met, and light that isn't there. The visual cortex is active, painting scenes and narratives without any guidance from the outside world. And when you wake, it feels like you've been somewhere, seen something, witnessed a private movie made just for you. Your eyes, marvellous as they are, only play a small part in the act of seeing. The real magic is what happens behind them. In a very real sense, you're not looking out at the world. You're looking in, at the brain's best attempt to show you what might be happening out there. And what a beautiful attempt it is. Close your eyes for a moment and listen to the world around you. Maybe you hear the gentle hum of a refrigerator, the distant murmur of cars, or the faint ticking of a clock. It feels so effortless, doesn't it? Like your ears are simply open windows, letting sound drift in and settle comfortably inside your mind. But just like with sight, what you hear is not the raw truth. It's a story shaped by your brain, polished with context, memory, and a splash of imagination. Sound is just vibrations, air molecules jostling one another in waves like a ripple through a crowd. These waves reach your ears, where they're funneled down the ear canal and vibrate the eardrum. From there, tiny bones in the middle ear amplify the vibrations and send them to the cochlea, a spiral-shaped structure filled with fluid and thousands of hair cells. These hair cells translate the mechanical vibrations into electrical signals, which are then sent to the auditory cortex in your brain. That's the part everyone remembers from science class. But what happens next is far more interesting. Once those signals hit the brain, they're decoded, compared, interpreted, and, quite often, completely reimagined. Your brain doesn't just hear sounds, it guesses what those sounds mean, where they came from, and whether they're important. It fills in gaps, smooths over disruptions, and even creates sounds that were never there in the first place. Take speech, for example. Spoken language is incredibly complex. There are no neat pauses between words in everyday conversation, just a flowing stream of sounds. Yet your brain slices that stream into distinct words and even anticipates what should come next. This is partly why you can still understand someone speaking with a thick accent or through static on a bad phone line. Your brain isn't just processing sound, it's predicting the most likely meanings based on the context and filling in the blanks. There's a famous demonstration of this called the phoneme restoration effect. If a brief sound is replaced with noise, say a cough, in the middle of a word, most people still hear the full word, as if the missing sound was never lost. Your brain patches over the interruption and gives you the illusion of uninterrupted speech. You didn't hear the missing sound, but you think you did. Then there's the McGurk effect, a playful and slightly unsettling reminder that hearing isn't done with the ears alone. In this effect, a person is shown saying one syllable, like gay, while the audio plays a different syllable, like bar. What do most people perceive? Neither. They hear dare, a fusion of the visual and auditory cues. Your brain takes in what you see and hear, weighs both, and decides on a compromise. In this case, it's wrong. But it's wrong in a very human, very logical way. The brain is trying to make sense of conflicting inputs, and settles on a solution that seems plausible, even if it's an illusion. This merging of senses happens all the time. Watching someone speak helps you understand them. That's why phone calls are more mentally taxing than face-to-face conversations. You don't realise how much you rely on lip movements and facial expressions until they're gone. Without those visual cues, your brain has to work harder to interpret what's being said, especially in noisy environments. In fact, the brain is so good at blending information from different senses that it can be tricked into creating entirely false perceptions. There's a strange and delightful example called the ventriloquist effect. When a sound is paired with a moving image, like a puppet's mouth, the brain often attributes the sound to the visual source, even if it's coming from somewhere else. You know the puppet isn't talking, but your perception insists otherwise. Your brain chooses consistency over accuracy. It would rather have a neat, coherent story than a fragmented reality. Now consider how quickly we react to sound. The auditory system is wired for speed. Sound processing happens in just a few dozen milliseconds, often faster than vision. That's evolutionary efficiency at its finest. Sound warns you of danger you can't see, like a snapping twig behind you, or a shout from around the corner. Your brain can't afford to take its time. It gets the signal, interprets the threat, and primes your body for action. That's also why sound can evoke such strong emotions. A baby's cry, a familiar voice, or a sudden loud bang all trigger visceral reactions. This isn't just cultural, it's biological. The amygdala, a key player in emotional processing, is tightly linked to the auditory system. Certain frequencies and sound patterns are more likely to grab our attention or provoke a reaction, especially those associated with danger or distress. Music, on the other hand, shows how sound can stir not just fear or urgency, but joy, nostalgia, longing, and even awe. Your brain doesn't just hear music, it feels it, anticipates it, and dances along in ways you might not even notice. When you listen to a melody, your brain predicts the next note based on rhythm and harmony. If the music confirms your expectation, you feel satisfied. If it surprises you in a pleasant way, you get a little rush of pleasure. That's why a well-timed chord change or unexpected harmony can give you goosebumps. This response isn't limited to musicians or trained ears. From infancy, humans show sensitivity to musical patterns. Studies have even found that babies can detect when a note in a simple melody is out of place. Music is embedded in our brains in ways we don't fully understand. It can change our heart rate, influence our breathing, and even modulate the release of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. In short, it can shift the entire mood of your internal landscape. And then there's the voice, the most intimate and complex of all sounds. The human voice carries information not just in the words it speaks, but in tone, pitch, rhythm, and pace. You can tell when someone is upset before they even finish a sentence. You can hear sarcasm, enthusiasm, exhaustion. You can sense hesitation in a pause, sincerity in a sigh. These subtle auditory cues are often processed unconsciously, but they colour every interaction. Your brain is constantly reading between the lines, or rather between the waves. Interestingly, your own name has a special status in your brain's hierarchy. It cuts through noise like a beacon. Even in a loud room, you can pick out your name from across the room, a phenomenon known as the cocktail party effect. Your brain is always monitoring your environment for personally relevant information, even when you're not consciously paying attention. It keeps one ear tuned to potential signals of importance, ready to zero in the moment something familiar arises. That filtering mechanism is crucial. Without it, you'd be overwhelmed by the constant rush of sound. Every tick, hum, footstep and rustling leaf would compete for your attention. The brain needs a way to sort through the clutter, and it does this remarkably well. Your auditory system constantly distinguishes between signal and noise, highlighting what matters and muting the rest. This is why sudden, sharp noises command your attention. Evolution has trained your brain to treat them as potential threats. A dropped plate, a slamming door, a bark in the dark. These sounds bypass your usual filtering and trigger a quick jolt of alertness. It's not always pleasant, but it's highly effective. At the other end of the spectrum are sounds designed to soothe. Nature sounds, slow rhythms, gentle white noise. All of these tap into your brain's ability to relax when the environment feels safe and predictable. Slow rhythmic sound patterns tend to slow your heartbeat and breathing, helping your nervous system wind down. This is part of why lullabies work, even for adults. There's something deeply calming about a soft, repetitive melody cradling the edges of your awareness. Interestingly, your brain can also hallucinate sound. This is more common than you might think. In moments of extreme stress, fatigue, or sensory deprivation, people report hearing music, voices, or vague murmurs. These aren't signs of madness. They're signs that your brain, in the absence of clear input, starts generating content to keep things running. It doesn't like silence, especially when it expects stimulation. That's why you might hear a phantom buzz from your phone or think someone called your name when they didn't. Your auditory system is primed to anticipate. Sometimes it overachieves. And yet, for all its quirks and illusions, the auditory system remains a marvel of engineering. It allows us to communicate, connect, and interpret the world in ways that vision alone could never manage. It gives shape to memory, texture to thought, and emotion to language. It helps us navigate both physical spaces and social ones, alerting us to danger, delight, and everything in between. When you hear a sound, you're not just receiving vibrations, you're decoding a rich stream of meaning, layering it with context, emotion, and expectation. Your ears deliver the signal, but it's your brain that brings it to life. Whether it's the trill of a bird, the laughter of a friend, or the slow, steady rhythm of a quiet voice as you drift off to sleep, each sound becomes part of your inner world, shaped, stretched, and painted with the soft brushstrokes of the mind. Touch is one of those senses we often take for granted until it's gone. You don't really notice the feeling of your socks against your ankles or the chair beneath you until something changes, like a sudden itch or the uncomfortable realization that your foot has fallen asleep. But beneath that quiet familiarity is a deeply complex and surprisingly emotional system. Touch isn't just about pressure and temperature, it's about connection, awareness, and the subtle ways your body maps itself onto the world. Let's start with the skin. It's your largest organ by far, stretching across your entire body like a living suit of armour. And it's not just a protective layer, it's packed with specialised receptors that pick up a variety of signals. There are mechanoreceptors for pressure and vibration, thermoreceptors for temperature, nociceptors for pain, and even some that help track the movement and position of your limbs, a sense known as proprioception. When you run your fingers along a soft blanket, those mechanoreceptors are firing off signals that travel through the nervous system to your brain. Different types of touch are processed by different types of receptors. Some are fast and precise, helping you identify texture and fine details. Others are slower, tuned to broader sensations like warmth or the soothing stroke of a hand. All of this information travels along peripheral nerves through the spinal cord and into the brain, where it's interpreted, filtered, and turned into the rich tapestry of tactile experience. The brain doesn't just register what is touching you, but how and why. A sharp jab from a corner of a table is processed very differently than a soft pat on the back. The context, intent, and emotional meaning of a touch can dramatically shape how it feels. This is especially true for the kind of touch we get from other people. Social touch is an entire category on its own. It's why a hug can be comforting, or why a reassuring hand on the shoulder can ease anxiety. Research shows that slow, gentle touch activates a special class of nerve fibers called C-tactile afferents. These are tuned specifically for emotionally meaningful touch, like stroking or caressing, and they send signals not just to the somatosensory cortex, but also to parts of the brain involved in emotional regulation, like the insular and the anterior cingulate cortex. In other words, your brain treats a loving touch like an emotional event, not just a physical one. Even in early life, touch plays a critical role. Newborns rely heavily on skin-to-skin contact for comfort and bonding. Premature babies who receive regular touch gain weight more quickly and show improved development. Human beings are wired to need physical contact. It's as fundamental as food and sleep. We're social creatures, and touch is one of our most primal languages. Then there's the curious sense of proprioception, your body's ability to know where it is in space. You can touch your nose with your eyes closed, raise your arms without looking, or walk without staring at your feet. That's proprioception at work. It's often called the sixth sense, though it doesn't deal with ghosts or intuition. It comes from sensors in your muscles, tendons, and joints that constantly update your brain about the position and movement of your limbs. Without it, even simple tasks would become impossible. People who have lost proprioceptive ability due to rare neurological conditions or injury describe the experience as deeply disorienting. They must watch their limbs to move them, and even then the motion feels foreign, like piloting a remote-controlled machine. It's a reminder of just how seamless and invisible this sense normally is, and how much of our bodily awareness depends on signals we never consciously notice. Taste and smell, meanwhile, are often treated as the sidekicks of the sensory world, overshadowed by vision and hearing, but in many ways they're the most intimate of all the senses. Sight and sound reach you from a distance. Taste and smell require a substance to enter your body. They are direct, immediate, and closely tied to survival. Taste, as you probably know, happens mainly on the tongue. There, taste buds detect 5 primary flavors: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. The savory flavor found in things like mushrooms, soy sauce, and Parmesan cheese. Each of these flavors serves a purpose. Sweetness signals energy-rich sugars. Saltiness helps maintain electrolyte balance. Sourness can warn of spoilage. Bitterness often signals toxins. And umami points to protein. Your body uses taste as a kind of chemical scanner, encouraging you to eat what's good and avoid what's dangerous. But taste alone is surprisingly limited. Most of what you think of as flavor actually comes from smell. When you eat, volatile molecules travel up through the back of your throat to your nose, where olfactory receptors process them. This is called retronasal olfaction, and it's the reason food tastes bland when you have a cold. Your taste buds might be working fine, but without smell, the richness of flavor disappears. The olfactory system is unusual in a few ways. For one, it bypasses the thalamus, the usual relay station for sensory information, and connects directly to areas of the brain involved in emotion and memory, like the amygdala and hippocampus. That's why smell is so strongly tied to recollection. A whiff of sunscreen can send you straight back to a childhood beach trip. The smell of old books might transport you to a quiet library or a rainy afternoon. These memory-laced reactions happen almost instantly, and often without conscious effort. Smell is also incredibly sensitive. Humans can distinguish between over 1 trillion different odours, though we're not always great at naming them. You might recognise the scent of your grandmother's perfume immediately, even if you couldn't describe it in words. Our brains evolved to treat certain smells as significant, especially those related to danger, food, and familiar people. The sense of smell has even been shown to play a role in social behaviour and attraction. Though we rarely think about it, humans emit a range of subtle chemical signals, and our brains are wired to pick up on them. Research has suggested that people may be able to detect immune system compatibility through scent alone, influencing mate selection. While it's not exactly a conscious decision, no one courts a partner based solely on armpit chemistry. It does show how deeply embedded smell is in our biology. Now let's take a moment to appreciate one of the more overlooked senses, interoception. This is your brain's ability to sense the internal state of your body. Hunger, thirst, heartbeat, breathing, bladder fullness. These are all tracked by interoceptive signals. They don't originate in the outside world, but within you. They keep the internal machinery of your body in check and help guide behaviour accordingly. You drink when you're thirsty, eat when you're hungry, lie down when you're exhausted. But interoception also contributes to your emotional life. That fluttering in your stomach when you're nervous, the tight chest when you're anxious, the warm buzz of contentment after a good meal. All of these are bodily states interpreted by your brain as emotions. Some scientists believe that emotions are, at their core, your brain's attempt to explain changes in internal sensation. Are you angry or just hungry? Is it love or too much caffeine? Sometimes it's hard to tell. There's even evidence that people differ in their interoceptive sensitivity. Some are highly attuned to their internal signals, able to detect subtle shifts in heartbeat or gut sensations. Others are less aware and may struggle to notice when they're stressed or tense until it becomes overwhelming. Interoception is not just about bodily regulation. It's deeply tied to self-awareness and mental health. Altogether, touch, taste, smell, and interoception form a kind of intimate quartet of perception. Unlike sight and sound, which reach out into the world, these senses turn inward or bring the world into you. They are rooted in physicality, grounded in the textures, temperatures, and chemicals that make up your immediate reality. They are also the most personal, entwined with emotion, memory, and meaning, in a way that no other senses quite match. And yet, just like the rest, these senses are not direct lines to the truth. They are interpreted, modulated, and sometimes even invented. The brain fills in flavors, adjusts temperatures, adds emotional coloration to physical sensations, and draws from past experience to make sense of what's happening in the present. Take phantom limb pain, for example. When a person loses a limb, they often continue to feel it, sometimes painfully. This is not a trick or delusion. The brain's body map, the somatosensory cortex, still includes that missing limb. It doesn't update immediately. The sensation feels real because, in a neurological sense, it is real. It exists in the brain's model of the body even if the physical part is gone. The brain can also be trained to change its model. Mirror therapy, where a mirror reflects the intact limb to simulate the missing one, can reduce phantom limb pain. By giving the brain new visual and tactile input, it can reshape its internal map and reduce the mismatch between expectation and experience. This kind of flexibility, neuroplasticity, is what makes all sensory perception so fascinating. Your experience of the world isn't fixed. It adapts, adjusts, and evolves based on context, learning, and need. The brain is always fine-tuning, always editing, always updating the model. In the end, whether you're sipping tea, walking barefoot through grass, or curling up under a warm blanket, you're not just touching the world. The world is touching you, and your brain is telling you a story about it. One woven with nerve endings shaped by past experience and gently tinted by your emotions. It's a quiet kind of magic, and it's happening every moment you're alive. Memory, contrary to popular belief, is not like a dusty library full of perfectly catalogued books. It's more like a busy kitchen, messy, improvisational, and always trying to whip up something palatable using whatever ingredients are on hand. Your brain isn't pulling neatly filed records from a mental filing cabinet. It's reconstructing, remixing, and seasoning your experiences every time you try to remember them. Which is why, oddly enough, the act of remembering something can actually change the memory itself. This might sound a little unsettling, especially if you pride yourself on having a sharp memory. But it's not a design flaw, it's a feature. Your brain doesn't prioritize accuracy, it prioritizes utility. If perfect recall were really the goal, we'd all be walking around haunted by every minor embarrassment and forgotten phone number since childhood. Instead, memory serves your ability to navigate life. It helps you learn from the past, make predictions, and tell stories about who you are. Let's start with how memories are made. The process begins with encoding, when your brain takes in sensory information and starts turning it into something usable. Maybe you're listening to a song, eating a slice of cake, or meeting someone new. Your brain registers what's happening, but it doesn't treat every detail equally. Attention plays a huge role here. What you focus on gets encoded more deeply. What you ignore is often lost forever. From there, the brain goes into storage mode. But again, this isn't about shelving things in a neat little corner. Memories are stored across different regions of the brain depending on their content. Visual elements might live in the visual cortex, emotional tones in the amygdala, and factual bits in the hippocampus. Your brain is less like a warehouse and more like a massive, interconnected web. A memory of your grandmother's kitchen might be distributed across dozens of neural pathways, smells, sounds, tastes, emotions, all linked together. Then comes retrieval. When you recall a memory, your brain doesn't simply pull out a static copy. Instead, it reactivates the network of neurons associated with that memory, essentially recreating it. And here's the twist. Every time you recall a memory, you slightly modify it. Maybe you forget a detail or add one that wasn't there before. Maybe you emphasize one part and downplay another. The next time you remember it, you're not remembering the original event, you're remembering the last time you remembered it. This is known as memory reconsolidation, and it's why memories aren't just fallible, they're downright slippery. You might confidently recall the layout of your childhood bedroom, or the way a certain person laughed, only to later discover that your memory doesn't match reality at all. Studies have shown how easy it is to implant false memories, especially when suggestions come from trusted sources. In one famous experiment, researchers were able to convince people that they had been lost in a shopping mall as a child, a completely fabricated event. The participants didn't just agree it had happened, they began to describe it in detail. Even without deliberate suggestion, your brain can mislead you. Think about eyewitness testimony. It's often treated as gold in the courtroom, but research shows that it's highly unreliable. Two people can witness the same event and walk away with entirely different stories, shaped by their expectations, emotions, and even the wording of the questions they're later asked. A simple change from, "Did you see the broken headlight?" to "Did you see a broken headlight?" can influence what someone thinks they saw. It's not that people are lying, it's that the brain fills in blanks and smooths over rough edges without asking permission. It creates a coherent narrative, even if that narrative isn't exactly true. Then there's the role of emotion. Strong emotions, especially fear and joy, can deepen memory encoding. That's why you might vividly recall where you were during a major life event, like hearing surprising news or experiencing something wonderful. These are called flashbulb memories, and while they feel especially accurate, they're still prone to distortion. Over time, the core emotion may remain, but the details shift. Interestingly, emotional memories often become more about the feeling than the facts. You might remember that a conversation was hurtful, but not exactly what was said, or that a vacation was blissful, even if it rained half the time. Your brain saves what matters to your story, not necessarily what happened moment to moment. Memories are also shaped by what you already believe. If you think of yourself as someone who's always been shy, you may unintentionally recall past events in a way that supports that belief. You remember freezing up in school but not the time you led a group project. This is called confirmation bias, and it doesn't just affect what you believe about politics or science, it subtly guides how you remember your own life. This narrative editing doesn't happen out of malice, it's part of how we make sense of ourselves. Memory is deeply tied to identity. You are, in a very real way, the story you tell yourself about your past. That story gives you a sense of continuity, a thread connecting your younger self to who you are now. And because the brain craves consistency, it prefers to preserve the story over the raw data. There's a term for this internal narrator, the autobiographical self. It's the voice that tells you who you are, where you've been, and what it all means. But that voice isn't a passive recorder, it's a highly involved editor constantly updating the script. And sometimes it rewrites entire chapters. Consider childhood memories. Many adults have vivid memories of being in a stroller or seeing the family dog as a toddler. But research suggests that most of these memories aren't from actual experience. They're reconstructions based on photos, family stories, or repeated retellings. The technical term for this phenomenon is source amnesia. You remember the content but forget where it came from. Eventually the line between lived memory and second-hand story blurs, and your brain adopts the tale as its own. And then there's déjà vu, that eerie feeling that you've experienced something before even when you haven't. Scientists believe it might stem from a brief hiccup in memory processing, where the brain mistakenly flags a new experience as familiar. It's like your memory system jumps the gun, tagging something as a repeat when it's actually brand new. It's not dangerous, just a little reminder that your internal reality checker isn't infallible. On the flip side, there's jamais vu, the feeling that something familiar suddenly seems strange. You're looking at a word you've written 100 times, and suddenly it looks alien. Or you find yourself in a familiar place, but it feels oddly unfamiliar. It's the brain's version of a double take, a momentary disruption in the smooth machinery of recognition. Despite all its quirks and imperfections, memory is remarkably resilient. It allows you to navigate daily life, build relationships, and learn from experience. You remember how to tie your shoes, the lyrics to your favourite song, the taste of your favourite meal. These aren't just facts, they're the texture of your life, and they live in different forms. Procedural memory stores skills and habits, semantic memory holds general knowledge, episodic memory captures personal experiences. Together, they create a rich, multi-dimensional model of the world and your place in it. What's fascinating is that memory is also future-oriented. When you imagine what you'll do next week or next year, you're using the same brain regions involved in recalling the past. The hippocampus, in particular, is active not only when retrieving memories but also when constructing mental simulations of possible futures. This is known as the constructive episodic simulation hypothesis. It suggests that memory evolved not to help you reminisce but to help you plan. When you think about it, that makes sense. The ability to imagine outcomes, learn from past mistakes, and mentally rehearse actions is essential for survival. Your brain is constantly running simulations, weighing options, and choosing paths. It uses memories as raw material to generate possible futures. That vacation you're dreaming of, that conversation you're dreading, that goal you're working toward, they all exist in your mind as recombined fragments of past experience. And while this flexibility makes memory powerful, it also makes it fragile. People with damage to the hippocampus often struggle not only to remember the past, but to imagine the future. Without memory, you lose more than recollection. You lose the ability to project yourself forward. Still, there's beauty in the imperfection. The fact that memory is reconstructive means it's also creative. You're not just a historian of your past, you are its author. You reshape your memories every time you tell a story, every time you reflect, every time you find new meaning in something old. Your memory may not be a flawless archive, but it's a living, breathing narrative, stitched together with emotion, filtered through belief, and polished by the passage of time. It's not a record of what happened, it's a reflection of what matters, and in the end, maybe that's what makes it so human. If you've ever caught yourself wondering, who am I really? Congratulations. You've stumbled upon one of the oldest, trickiest, and most persistent questions the human brain has ever cooked up. The idea of the self feels solid. You wake up each morning with the sense that you're the same person you were yesterday, albeit maybe with messier hair and a slightly stronger need for coffee. But if you dig just a little deeper into how your brain actually works, that sense of a unified self starts to feel a bit like a magician's illusion. Elegant, convincing, and possibly held together with duct tape and stage lighting. At the centre of this illusion is the fact that the brain doesn't operate like a single coherent unit. It's more like a team of specialists, each with its own job, working together in a noisy and sometimes uncoordinated way. You have regions for processing vision, others for language, some for emotion, others for decision-making, and they're all constantly exchanging information, negotiating, and sometimes arguing. There isn't one central spot where it all comes together and gets stamped with an I am me label. The sense of self emerges from this messy, brilliant collaboration. This idea becomes especially clear when we look at people who've experienced brain injuries. There are rare but fascinating cases where damage to specific brain areas alters a person's sense of identity in startling ways. Some individuals no longer recognize loved ones, while others develop entirely new personalities. The brain can rewrite who you are, or at least how you appear to others, based on which systems are disrupted. In some ways, that's deeply humbling. It suggests that your you-ness isn't etched in stone. It's a delicate balance held together by biology. One of the most dramatic illustrations of this idea comes from patients who have undergone a procedure called corpus callosotomy, more commonly known as split brain surgery. In these individuals, the connection between the brain's two hemispheres, the corpus callosum, is severed, usually to treat severe epilepsy. The result is that the two halves of the brain can no longer communicate directly. You might expect that this would lead to obvious dysfunction, but what's remarkable is how subtle the effects can be, until you test the two hemispheres separately. Here's where things get weird. The left side of your brain, for most people, is the seat of language. It's the part that talks, rationalizes, and explains. The right side, on the other hand, is more spatial, emotional, and visual. In split brain experiments, researchers found that if you show an image to the right hemisphere, by flashing it to the left visual field, the person can't describe it, because the language centers in the left hemisphere never saw it. But if you ask the person to point to the image using their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, they can do it with ease. What this suggests is that the two hemispheres are each processing information independently, and when the left hemisphere, the so-called interpreter, doesn't know what the right side is doing, it just makes up a story. In one famous case, a split-brain patient was shown a snowy landscape with their right hemisphere and a chicken claw with their left. They were then asked to point to related images. With the left hand, they picked a snow shovel, with the right hand, a chicken. When asked why they chose the shovel, the left hemisphere, which hadn't seen the snowy scene, said, "Oh, that's easy. You need a shovel to clean out the chicken coop." The brain wasn't lying. It was just doing what it always does, creating a coherent story from incomplete information. These kinds of experiments reveal something important. Your brain is constantly telling itself stories about who you are and why you do what you do. And those stories don't have to be true. They just have to feel plausible. Your inner narrator wants coherence, even when coherence doesn't exist. The concept of the interpreter comes from neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga, who worked extensively with split-brain patients. He suggested that the left hemisphere acts like a press secretary, always ready with an explanation for your actions, even if it has no real insight into what's going on. You scratch your nose and your brain says, "Ah, yes, I was itchy." But was it? Or did some subtle cue trigger the motion, and now your conscious mind is just tagging along after the fact, writing the script in reverse? This leads us to a provocative idea, that consciousness is not the cause of your actions, but the result. That your brain initiates behavior, and only afterward does your conscious self explain it. Some experiments seem to support this, such as studies using EEG machines to detect the brain's activity before a person becomes aware of a decision. Participants are asked to press a button whenever they feel like it, and researchers find that the brain shows signs of preparing for the action several hundred milliseconds before the person reports the conscious decision to press. In essence, your brain decides, and then your conscious mind claims credit. That might sound disturbing, like you're just a puppet being operated by unseen forces. But it's not quite that dire. It's more that the conscious self is like a rider on an elephant. You might think you're steering, but much of the movement comes from below, driven by instinct, habit, and unconscious processing. The rider can influence, redirect, and reflect, but the elephant often moves on its own. Your sense of continuity, the feeling that you are the same person across time, is also something your brain works hard to maintain. Yet identity is more fluid than we like to admit. Think about how different you were 10 years ago. Different tastes, beliefs, maybe even a different hairstyle that seemed like a good idea at the time. The you of the past can feel like a completely separate person, and in many ways, they were. Your brain has rewired itself, new memories have formed, habits have changed. But your internal narrator bridges the gap with the illusion of a stable self. Some philosophers and scientists argue that there is no single, unified self at all, just a collection of mental processes bundled together by memory and attention. This idea, sometimes called the bundle theory of the self, goes all the way back to the 18th century philosopher David Hume. He couldn't find any solid core to his own mind, just a stream of sensations, thoughts and emotions flowing by. Modern neuroscience largely agrees. What we call I is a mosaic. Perception, memory, intention, emotion, and bodily awareness, all woven into a story that feels cohesive but is constantly changing. The brain even maintains separate maps of the body and the world around it. Your sense of where your hand is comes from one set of neural processes. Your sense of what that hand can do comes from another, and your awareness of that hand as your hand, that's yet another layer. These layers usually integrate seamlessly, but in rare cases they can fall apart. Some people with certain neurological conditions develop a sense that a limb is not theirs, even though it's attached to their body. This is called somatoparaphrenia, and it's another glimpse into how constructed and fragile our sense of ownership can be. Even something as simple as recognizing yourself in a mirror involves complex processing. Infants typically don't recognize themselves until they're around 18 months old. Before that, they might try to touch or interact with the other baby in the mirror. Self-recognition requires not only visual awareness, but also the ability to map that image onto your internal sense of identity. That ability is surprisingly rare in the animal kingdom. Only a few species like chimpanzees, elephants, dolphins, and some birds have passed the mirror test. So where does all this leave us? If the self is an illusion, is it a bad thing? Not necessarily. Illusions can be beautiful. A rainbow is an illusion after all, a trick of light and water droplets. But it's still real in the sense that it exists as an experience. The self, too, is real as an experience. It's the lens through which we see the world, even if the lens itself is more art than artifact. You're a process, not a product, a verb, not a noun. Your brain is constantly rewriting, updating and negotiating who you are in response to new experiences, emotions and insights. That fluidity isn't a flaw. It's what allows you to grow, adapt and reinvent yourself over time. The fact that you feel like the same person day after day is not because nothing changes, but because your brain is exceptionally good at stitching the story together. In the end, the self might not be a single thing you can point to, but rather a delicate balance of many systems working in harmony. It's not a fixed identity, but a constantly evolving performance, one that your brain choreographs moment by moment. You're not the same person you were yesterday, and that's not a failure of memory or personality. That's the miracle of being alive. Dreams are like private screenings of strange films where you're the director, the actor, and usually the confused audience too. You might find yourself flying over a purple ocean, talking to a giraffe in a business suit, or being late for an exam you never studied for, in a subject you haven't taken since high school. And somehow, none of this seems odd until you wake up. That's the wild magic of dreaming. The brain creates entire worlds while you sleep, and you go along for the ride without question. Sleep in general is an extraordinary process. It's not a passive shutdown as people once believed. Instead, your brain becomes incredibly active during certain phases of sleep, especially during rapid eye movement sleep, commonly known as REM sleep. This is the stage most closely associated with vivid dreaming. During REM, your eyes dart back and forth under your eyelids, your breathing becomes irregular, your muscles temporarily become paralyzed, and your brain activity ramps up to levels remarkably similar to wakefulness. In fact, if you were to look at a brain scan of someone in REM sleep, you might assume they were awake, until you notice they're completely still and unresponsive. But here's where things get especially fascinating. The parts of your brain responsible for logic and self-awareness go quiet during REM sleep, while the regions involved in emotion, memory, and visual imagery light up like a fireworks display. The result? A mental space where realism takes a back seat, but emotional intensity takes the wheel. It's like your brain is in creative mode, generating surreal scenarios with complete confidence and zero concern for continuity. One of the leading theories about why we dream is called the activation synthesis hypothesis. It suggests that during REM sleep, the brainstem sends out bursts of random neural signals. The higher brain regions, particularly the cortex, then try to make sense of these signals by weaving them into a story. It's a bit like receiving random words from a typewriter and trying to turn them into a poem. The story doesn't have to make logical sense. It just has to feel coherent in the moment. That's why dreams often jump from one scene to another without warning. Your brain isn't confused, it's improvising. Another theory, known as the threat simulation theory, proposes that dreams evolved as a kind of virtual reality training ground. According to this idea, dreams allow you to rehearse responses to dangerous or socially complex situations in a low-risk environment. That could explain why many people have recurring dreams about being chased, falling, or being unprepared. It's not just anxiety bubbling up, it might be your brain practicing how to survive. Whatever their evolutionary purpose, dreams certainly have a strong link to memory. During sleep, especially in the later stages of the night, the brain works to consolidate memories, strengthening important ones, discarding the irrelevant, and integrating new knowledge into your existing mental framework. Dreams might be a byproduct of this process, or perhaps even a part of it. You often dream about people, places, or concerns from your waking life, though usually rearranged in strange ways. It's like your brain is reorganizing its filing cabinet and throwing a themed party at the same time. Lucid dreaming is where things get particularly curious. This occurs when you become aware that you're dreaming while still inside the dream. Some people can even learn to control their dreams, flying at will, changing the scenery, or conjuring dream characters to interact with. Studies using brain imaging have shown that during lucid dreams, there's increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with reasoning and self-awareness. In other words, it's as if the waking mind briefly reboots inside the dream state. People who practice lucid dreaming often use techniques like reality checks, asking themselves throughout the day whether they're dreaming. Over time, the habit can carry over into sleep. For example, one method is to look at your hands or a clock and see if they behave normally. In a dream, hands might have extra fingers, and clocks tend to misbehave, numbers swimming or changing every time you glance away. Once you spot something strange, you can trigger lucidity. Interestingly, lucid dreams tend to occur more frequently in people who are highly introspective or prone to vivid imagination. They're also more common in people who wake up briefly during the night and then fall back asleep, often slipping straight into REM sleep. While not everyone experiences lucid dreams naturally, they're not particularly rare. Around half of all people report having had at least one lucid dream in their lifetime. Then there are sleep disorders that show just how thin the line is between dreaming and waking. Take sleep paralysis, for instance. This is when you wake up mentally but remain physically paralyzed, a normal part of REM sleep that usually goes unnoticed. However, when it happens consciously, it can be terrifying. People often report feeling unable to move, sensing a presence in the room, or seeing shadowy figures. These hallucinations are called hypnopompic if they occur upon waking, and hypnagogic if they happen as you're falling asleep. Sleep paralysis has been the inspiration for countless folklore tales around the world. In some cultures, it's attributed to malevolent spirits or supernatural forces. The famous old hag sitting on the chest is a common motif, and the experience can be profoundly disturbing. But from a scientific perspective, it's simply a glitch in the transition between sleep states. Your brain's dream imagery leaks into wakefulness, while your body's natural muscle inhibition lingers for a moment too long. Another interesting quirk of dreaming is how little you remember. Most people forget their dreams within minutes of waking. This isn't a sign of a defective memory. It's a result of the brain's chemistry during REM sleep. The neurotransmitters that help encode memories are suppressed during dreaming. Unless you wake up during or immediately after a dream, you're unlikely to store it long term. Even then, the details often evaporate like mist. There are, of course, exceptions. Some people naturally remember dreams more often, and certain techniques like keeping a dream journal can help. Writing down your dreams as soon as you wake up reinforces the memory and increases dream recall over time. Within a few weeks of consistent journaling, many people notice that their dreams become more vivid, elaborate, and easier to remember. Dream content can vary widely from person to person, but there are some surprisingly universal themes. Flying, falling, being chased, showing up late, losing teeth, or finding yourself unprepared. These dreams appear across cultures and ages. They're often symbolic, tied to stress, uncertainty, or desire. But they don't always mean something deep or mysterious. Sometimes a dream about missing the bus just means you've been anxious about time. Sometimes a dream about talking to a walrus in a tuxedo is exactly as weird as it sounds. Freud famously suggested that dreams are a window into the unconscious mind, filled with hidden desires and repressed emotions. His theories have largely fallen out of scientific favour, but the idea that dreams reflect our inner life still holds weight. Even if they don't deliver coded messages from the unconscious, dreams are undeniably shaped by our thoughts, experiences, and emotions. From a neuroscience perspective, dreams offer a glimpse into how the brain operates without the constraints of external reality. In waking life, your brain constantly checks its predictions against sensory input. In dreams, that feedback loop is cut off. There's no real visual data, no touch or smell, no sense of balance or position. The brain, left to its own devices, fills in the blanks with whatever it has: memories, impressions, stories, fears, and hopes. It creates a virtual reality, unconstrained by physics or logic, and then places you right in the center of it. This capacity for internal simulation might be one of the brain's most impressive features. Even while you're asleep, your mind remains hard at work, running scenarios, solving problems, or simply playing. There have been cases where people reported solving creative puzzles or waking up with new insights into problems after dreaming about them. Artists, inventors, and scientists have often credited dreams for inspiration. The melody for the Beatles' song Yesterday came to Paul McCartney in a dream. The structure of the benzene molecule reportedly came to chemist August Kekulé as a dream of a snake biting its own tail. Whether or not these stories are fully accurate, they highlight the brain's potential to connect ideas in novel ways when freed from the constraints of waking thought. Of course, not all dreams are helpful or welcome. Nightmares can be distressing and disruptive, especially for people dealing with trauma. In some cases, recurring nightmares can interfere with sleep and emotional well-being. Researchers have developed therapies aimed at reshaping nightmares, such as imagery rehearsal therapy, where individuals visualize a more positive version of the nightmare while awake, helping to reduce its frequency or intensity. In recent years, scientists have even begun experimenting with ways to influence dream content, through sounds, smells, or gentle suggestions given during sleep. It's early days yet, but the idea of guiding the dream world is a tantalizing one. Imagine being able to practice a speech, face a fear, or simply enjoy a flying tour of an imagined city, while your body rests quietly in bed. Ultimately, dreams remind us that reality, at least as the brain experiences it, is flexible. They blur the line between fact and fiction, between memory and imagination. When you're dreaming, you accept the strange and the surreal without question. A purple sky? Perfectly fine. A talking goat? Not worth a second thought. Your brain doesn't just go along with it, it creates it. And when you wake, you carry a piece of that inner universe with you, even if you don't remember it. The dreaming brain is not separate from your waking self. It's another mode of operation, one that's rich, imaginative, and strangely honest. It may not always make sense, but it's yours. And somewhere deep inside, while your conscious mind rests, your sleeping brain continues its quiet, surreal, nocturnal storytelling, one dream at a time. Consciousness is one of those things we all think we understand, until someone actually asks us to define it. Then suddenly it slips through your fingers like mist. It's the voice in your head, the awareness behind your eyes, the movie playing in your mind. You experience it all day, every day, and yet explaining what it is, where it comes from, or how it works is like trying to describe the taste of water to someone who's never been thirsty. You just know it, you feel it, but how do you explain it? At its most basic, consciousness is the state of being aware of yourself, your thoughts, your environment. But that definition, while neat, doesn't do justice to the staggering complexity hiding behind the curtain. Because really what makes consciousness so puzzling isn't that we have it, it's that we experience it. We don't just detect a light, we see it. We don't just hear frequencies, we listen to music. We don't just register pain, we feel the sting. There's a quality to awareness, a depth to being alive, that seems to go beyond neurons firing in the dark. Scientists call this the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers. The easy problems, by comparison, are things like, how does the brain process visual information? How do we store memories? What neural circuits are involved in decision-making? These are difficult, yes, but in principle they can be solved through standard scientific investigation. The hard problem is different. It asks, why does all that information processing feel like something? Why is there an inner world at all? Your brain is, as far as we can tell, a 3-pound lump of tissue running on electrical and chemical signals. And yet somehow, from that biological machinery emerges a mind that can reflect, imagine, enjoy sunsets, worry about taxes, and wonder what happens after death. It's as if your brain is playing a movie that only you can see, and no one's quite sure how the projector works. Let's start by zooming in on what's actually happening inside your head. Right now, billions of neurons are communicating through tiny electrical impulses, forming patterns and networks that give rise to everything from your breathing to your personality. Different regions of the brain specialize in different tasks. The visual cortex processes sight. The motor cortex controls movement. The prefrontal cortex handles planning, decision-making, and social behavior. But consciousness doesn't seem to reside in any one of these areas. Instead, it appears to emerge from the way they interact. Think of it like an orchestra. No single instrument makes the symphony. It's the coordinated activity of all of them playing together that creates the music. In the same way, consciousness may arise not from a single consciousness center in the brain, but from the integration of multiple processes, vision, touch, memory, emotion, all woven into a unified experience. This idea is sometimes called the global workspace theory. It suggests that consciousness functions like a theatre, where various subconscious processes compete for the spotlight. When a thought, sensation, or memory wins that competition, it becomes part of your conscious awareness, centre stage, bathed in light. The rest stays behind the curtain. According to this theory, consciousness is what happens when information is broadcast widely across different parts of the brain. Your senses feed in data. Your memory supplies context. Your attention system decides what's worth focusing on. And once all that comes together, it gets published, so to speak, to the entire brain. The result is the feeling of being aware is not magic, just a highly complex coordinated exchange of information. But while this helps describe the mechanics of consciousness, it still doesn't quite answer the deeper question. Why does this information exchange feel like anything at all? Why isn't it just a cold, unconscious computation, like a calculator crunching numbers? That's where things get tricky. One emerging approach to this question is known as integrated information theory, or IIT for short. This theory proposes that consciousness arises from systems that are both highly integrated and highly differentiated. In other words, a conscious system must have parts that are deeply interconnected, so they can influence each other, and parts that are unique, so the system as a whole has many possible states. The more complex and unified this information processing, the greater the level of consciousness. According to IIT, consciousness is not something added to a system. It is the structure of the system itself. It's an intrinsic property, like mass or charge. This means that in theory, any system with the right structure could be conscious, even a computer, a robot, or perhaps something stranger. Of course, that raises eyebrows. Does this mean your phone has a tiny glimmer of awareness? Probably not, unless it's processing information in a deeply integrated and differentiated way. Most artificial systems today are not built like that, but it does mean that consciousness might not be limited to biological organisms. It could be a feature of any system that meets the right conditions. There's another school of thought known as higher order thought theory. This one proposes that consciousness depends on a kind of meta-awareness, the ability not just to have thoughts or sensations, but to know that you're having them. A dog might feel pain, but a human can feel pain and reflect on it. I am in pain, and I wish it would stop. According to this view, self-awareness is a necessary ingredient in conscious experience. It's not enough to process information, you need a mental mirror to look back at yourself. But what about creatures that don't have this kind of meta-awareness? Are they conscious in some smaller way? That's still hotly debated. Some researchers argue that consciousness comes in degrees. A fish may not ponder the meaning of life, but it probably experiences the world in some way. Maybe a simpler, more fragmented kind of consciousness. Others draw a sharper line between true awareness and mere reactivity. If a robot dodges an obstacle, is it aware of the obstacle, or is it just following its programming? This question has become even more pressing with the rise of artificial intelligence. As machines become more sophisticated, able to converse, learn, and even mimic emotion, we start to wonder, could they ever be truly conscious? Most experts say we're not there yet. Today's AI, no matter how convincing, is still running on complex pattern recognition, not awareness. It doesn't feel joy or curiosity. It doesn't know anything. It just calculates. But as our technology evolves, it's not unthinkable that we might someday build systems that process information in ways similar to the human brain. And then the question won't be, can we build a conscious machine? But how would we know if we did? One of the strangest features of consciousness is that it creates the illusion of a unified self, a continuous I watching the world unfold. But as we've seen, the brain doesn't work that way. There is no single command center or inner homunculus pulling the levers. The sense of self is stitched together from many threads: sensory input, memory, emotion, language, and yet it feels like a seamless whole. This illusion is so strong that we rarely question it. But neuroscience has shown us that the self can be divided, altered, even temporarily erased under certain conditions. People with dissociative disorders, for example, sometimes report feeling disconnected from their bodies or emotions, as if observing themselves from outside. Patients undergoing brain surgery while awake have described their sense of self shifting or fragmenting, depending on which areas of the brain are stimulated. And under the influence of certain psychedelic substances, users often report a total loss of ego, the feeling that the boundary between self and world has dissolved. These experiences suggest that consciousness is not monolithic. It's a construction, flexible and changeable, rooted in brain activity that can be modulated in many ways. Which raises yet another question. Where does the conscious experience begin and end? Does it flicker on and off as we sleep? Does it exist in babies before they form language? What about people in comas or in vegetative states? Modern neuroimaging has made it possible to look for signs of awareness in patients who appear unresponsive. In one famous study, researchers asked a patient in a vegetative state to imagine playing tennis. Astonishingly, brain scans showed activity in the motor planning areas, just as you'd expect from someone actually imagining that scenario. In some cases, patients were even able to answer yes or no questions using imagined tasks to light up different parts of the brain. These studies suggest that consciousness may persist even when all outward signs are gone. It may be quieter, harder to detect, but not absent. And yet, for all our efforts to study consciousness scientifically, there's something deeply personal about it. No one else can access your inner world. You can describe it, test its components, even try to replicate it, but the experience itself remains private. That's the thing that makes consciousness so elusive. It is subjective by nature. It's not something you see in the lab, it's something you are. Despite all this complexity, there's something beautifully simple at the heart of consciousness. It's the feeling of being here, of noticing the world, of being aware that you are aware. Whether that experience is generated by neurons or some yet undiscovered principle, it is undeniably the most intimate part of being alive. You can change your thoughts, your beliefs, your behavior, but consciousness is what makes change possible. It's the canvas on which everything else is painted, and maybe that's the best way to think about it, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a wonder to be appreciated. Your consciousness is your constant companion, the voice narrating your life, the presence behind your eyes. It might be a glitch in biology, or the natural product of evolution, or something more mysterious entirely. But whatever it is, it's yours, and right now, it's gently keeping you company. Imagine walking into a crowded room. There's laughter in one corner, someone arguing softly over a phone call near the window, and a cluster of people telling stories around a table. Instinctively, your brain starts doing something rather extraordinary. It builds mental models of the people around you. It figures out who might be listening, who's tired, who seems awkward, who's pretending not to be. Without thinking, you begin assigning motives, feelings, and personalities to everyone. It's like your mind is constantly auditioning for the role of psychic detective, guessing what other people are thinking and feeling based on almost no data at all. This remarkable skill is called social perception, and it's something the human brain is unusually good at. We are, after all, social creatures. Our survival has long depended on our ability to understand and predict the behavior of others, whether we're cooperating to build a shelter or figuring out if someone's about to throw a spear. The ability to interpret other minds, to read faces, tones, gestures, and context is something that develops early and operates nearly all the time. One of the foundational concepts in understanding this process is known as theory of mind. This is the capacity to recognize that other people have thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and perspectives different from your own. It might sound obvious, but it's not something we're born with. Most children develop a basic theory of mind around the age of 4. Before that, they assume everyone sees the world the same way they do. That's why a 3-year-old might cover their eyes and believe you can't see them. In their mind, if they can't see, then you can't either. But once this ability kicks in, it becomes second nature. You begin to anticipate what others might know or want or fear. You start to understand when someone is joking or lying or being polite. And just as importantly, you begin to care what others think about you. Social perception doesn't just help you decode others, it's also the root of self-consciousness. The brain seems to have a dedicated network for this kind of social thinking. Regions like the medial prefrontal cortex, the temporoparietal junction, and the posterior cingulate cortex light up when we think about other people's beliefs and intentions. These areas help us take the perspective of others, empathize, and navigate complex social landscapes. They're like the backstage crew, managing the props and lighting for the ongoing play that is human interaction. Of course, the system isn't perfect. Your brain's eagerness to read other minds can sometimes go a little overboard. This is especially evident in something called the hyperactive agency detection device, a mouthful but an entertaining one. It refers to the tendency to assume intention behind ambiguous events. If a shadow moves suddenly, you jump. If a rustle comes from the bushes, you assume something, or someone, is there. Better to mistakenly believe there's a threat than to ignore a real one. This bias towards spotting agents, even when they might not exist, may have helped our ancestors survive in a world full of predators and rivals. It also explains why we sometimes see faces in clouds or believe our computers are out to get us when they freeze right before a deadline. Your brain can't help but anthropomorphize, assigning human characteristics to non-human things. That's why we name our cars, yell at our phones, and feel personally offended when the printer jams. It's the brain's social machinery working overtime, trying to make sense of a world full of things that don't actually have minds. Another entertaining example of this is the Hyder-Simmel illusion. In a classic psychological experiment from the 1940s, researchers showed people a short animation of simple geometric shapes, just a few triangles and a circle moving around a screen. Despite the lack of detail, viewers instinctively described the shapes as people. The big triangle is chasing the little one, or the circle is trying to escape. Even with no faces, no voices, and no story, the human brain made a story. It couldn't help itself. This storytelling impulse extends to real life. We interpret tone, body language, and expression to build narratives about others, often without even realizing it. If someone crosses their arms, we might assume they're angry. If they avoid eye contact, maybe they're guilty. But of course, someone might just be cold or shy or thinking about lunch. The brain likes to guess, but it doesn't always guess correctly. Facial expressions are one of the most direct channels of social information, and your brain is fine-tuned to pick up even the subtlest twitch of an eyebrow. The fusiform face area, nestled in the temporal lobe, is specialized for recognizing faces. That's why you can spot a friend in a crowd or recognize a celebrity from a grainy photo. But this area isn't just about identification. It also helps decode emotion. A raised brow, a squint, a smirk. They're all signals your brain reads instantly, often before you consciously process them. This quick reading of emotion ties into another system known as mirror neurons. Discovered in monkeys and later studied in humans, mirror neurons are brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you see someone else perform the same action. If you see someone stub their toe, your mirror neurons for pain may activate just as if you'd stubbed your own. These cells are thought to be part of the neurological foundation of empathy. They help you understand others by simulating their experience inside your own brain. Empathy is a powerful tool, but it's also selective. Your brain is more likely to empathize with people who look like you, think like you, or belong to your group. This tendency, sometimes called in-group bias, can be both helpful and harmful. It builds social cohesion and trust within communities, but it can also lead to stereotyping and exclusion. The brain's social machinery, while sophisticated, is still built on ancient foundations. Interestingly, humans seem to have a built-in desire for social understanding even in infancy. Newborns prefer to look at faces over other objects. By a few months old, babies can distinguish between friendly and unfriendly social interactions, showing a preference for helpful characters. As we grow, we continue honing these skills, learning the subtle art of reading intention, deciphering sarcasm, and navigating the intricate dance of human communication. And yes, sarcasm is its own special trick. It requires you to process the literal meaning of a statement, detect a mismatch with tone or context, and then reverse the intended meaning, all in real time. Not all brains find this easy. Some neurological conditions, like autism spectrum disorder, affect social perception and make it harder to read between the lines. But even within the general population, the ability to detect social cues varies widely. Some people are natural mind readers, others not so much. Then there's the matter of inner dialogue. We often talk to ourselves in our heads, rehearsing conversations, imagining scenarios, or replaying awkward moments with fresh embarrassment. This internal monologue is part of what helps us model not only other minds but our own. It allows us to simulate how others might react, what they might say, and how we might respond. Your brain is running mini soap operas all day long, casting and recasting people in different roles: friend, rival, mentor, stranger. All of this constant social modelling burns a lot of brain power. Studies using brain imaging show that even when we're at rest, the brain's default mode network is highly active. This network includes regions involved in self-reflection, memory, and imagining other perspectives. Essentially, when you're doing nothing, your brain is rehearsing social scenarios, reflecting on past conversations, or preparing for future ones. It's like a mental rehearsal space that never fully shuts down. But for all its sophistication, the social brain is still subject to quirks and errors. One common mistake is the fundamental attribution error, our tendency to explain other people's behaviour in terms of their character rather than the situation. If someone cuts us off in traffic, we think they're a jerk. But if we cut someone off, it's because we're late or distracted. This bias helps us simplify the social world, but it also skews our judgments. And then there's spotlight bias, the belief that people are paying more attention to us than they actually are. You might feel like everyone noticed that awkward thing you said, or the stain on your shirt, but chances are they didn't. They were too busy worrying about their own awkwardness. We're all starring in our own mental sitcoms, rarely tuning into anyone else's channel for very long. Despite all these quirks, the brain's social skills remain one of its most impressive features. They allow us to cooperate, compete, build civilizations, and write long, rambling bedtime podcasts about brains. Every glance, every nod, every raised eyebrow is processed, interpreted, and woven into a constantly evolving story about the people around us. The human brain didn't evolve in isolation. It evolved in groups, in families, tribes, communities. Understanding others was never optional. It was survival. And while today's social landscape may involve more emojis and fewer saber-toothed tigers, the underlying machinery hasn't changed all that much. Your brain is still trying to read the room, anticipate reactions, and keep track of who said what during the last Zoom meeting. It's a dance of intention and interpretation, played out billions of times a day in conversations, glances, silences, and thoughts. And you're not just a participant in this dance, you're also the choreographer, constantly adjusting your steps in response to others. So even when you're alone, your mind isn't really alone. It's filled with imagined conversations, reflections on past interactions, and rehearsals for future ones. The social brain never really rests. It's always weaving the tapestry of connection, trying to understand others, and just as importantly, trying to be understood. For all its brilliance, flexibility, and charm, the human brain has a few blind spots, some metaphorical, some literal, and many that walk straight into walls of logic and reason without even pausing to apologize. It turns out that being aware, conscious, and intelligent doesn't necessarily protect us from being wrong. In fact, sometimes it makes us better at being confidently incorrect. Our minds are full of clever shortcuts, emotional detours, and strange little traps that influence how we think, remember, and make decisions. These quirks are known as cognitive biases, and once you start noticing them, it's a bit like finding plot holes in your favourite movie. You still enjoy the show, but you can't unsee them. One of the most notorious of these mental shortcuts is confirmation bias. This is your brain's tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information in a way that supports what you already believe. It's not done maliciously. Your brain just really enjoys being right. If you think a particular food causes headaches, you'll start to notice every time you eat it and feel a twinge later, but you'll probably forget all the times you ate it and felt fine. If you believe your favourite sports team is unfairly treated by referees, You'll remember every bad call that went against them and ignore the ones in their favour. It's like being your own personal cheerleader, but for your opinions. This bias is especially powerful in the age of the internet, where algorithms and social media can create a feedback loop of beliefs. When you click on an article that confirms your point of view, the system shows you more like it. Before you know it, your digital world starts to look like a mirror, reflecting your thoughts back to you with increasing intensity. It feels like the truth, but it's more like standing in an echo chamber shouting, "I agree with myself." Another mental hiccup is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is as fun to say as it is to observe. This bias refers to the phenomenon where people with low ability in a certain area tend to overestimate their competence. Meanwhile, those who are more skilled often underestimate their expertise. In other words, the less you know, the more confident you might feel, and the more you learn, the more aware you become of what you don't know. This creates a curious situation where confidence and competence are not always aligned. It's why someone who's read a few articles on quantum physics might feel ready to rewrite the laws of the universe, while an actual physicist is quietly muttering, "Well, it's complicated." This isn't just an academic curiosity, it has real consequences. Overconfidence can lead people to make poor decisions, ignore expert advice, or double down on mistakes. At the same time, those who are most knowledgeable may hesitate to speak up, unsure of whether they've truly grasped the full picture. It's a cognitive paradox where certainty does not always reflect reality. Then there's hindsight bias, also known as the "I knew it all along" effect. After an event occurs, it suddenly seems obvious that it was going to happen. The stock market crashed. Of course it did. Look at all the signs. A couple broke up. Obviously, it was clear they weren't happy. Hindsight bias smooths out the messiness of life by creating a tidy narrative. But in doing so, it gives us the illusion of predictability and control, which can make us overconfident in our ability to forecast future events. Availability bias is another slippery customer. This refers to our tendency to judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily examples come to mind. For instance, after watching a string of news stories about plane crashes, you might feel that flying is extremely dangerous, even though statistically it's far safer than driving. Because dramatic, emotional, or recent events are more memorable, they feel more common than they really are. The brain equates ease of recall with frequency, which is not always a reliable connection. The brain also has a strong preference for patterns. We're natural-born pattern seekers. This is helpful for things like language, music, and predicting outcomes. But it also leads to a tendency called apophenia, seeing patterns where none exist. That's why gamblers might believe a roulette wheel is due to land on red after a long streak of black, or why we see faces in toast and hear secret messages in songs played backward. Your brain is constantly trying to make sense of chaos, and it would rather find a false pattern than admit there isn't one. Another common misstep is anchoring bias. This is when the first piece of information you receive sets the tone for everything that follows. If you walk into a store and see a jacket marked down from $200 to $80, it feels like a great deal, even if the jacket is actually only worth $40. That original number, the anchor, sticks in your mind and influences your judgment. Anchoring can happen in all kinds of situations, from negotiations to medical diagnoses to multiple choice tests. Sunk cost fallacy is another charming trick the brain plays on itself. This is the tendency to continue investing in something because of the time, money or effort already spent, even when it's clearly not working. Maybe you've kept watching a show you don't enjoy just because you're already 4 seasons in, or stayed in a long awkward dinner because you ordered the expensive entree. The brain resists walking away because it feels like admitting defeat. But logically, past investments shouldn't influence future decisions. If you're in a hole, the sensible move is to stop digging, not to congratulate yourself on the depth. Then there's the illusion of explanatory depth. This is the feeling that you understand something far better than you actually do. You might think you know how a toilet works or why the sky's blue, but if someone pressed you for a detailed explanation, you might quickly discover some gaping holes in your knowledge. Studies have shown that people often rate their understanding of everyday mechanisms very highly until they're asked to explain them step by step. Suddenly that confidence evaporates, and what once seemed obvious becomes a delightful little mystery. Framing effects also play a major role in how we interpret information. The way something is presented can significantly influence our perception of it. A treatment that's described as having a 90% success rate sounds much more reassuring than one described as having a 10% failure rate, even though the numbers are identical. Politicians, advertisers, and news outlets are well aware of this trick. The spin, not the content, often guides opinion. Even our memory is riddled with biases. The Pekan rule suggests that people judge an experience largely based on how they felt, at its most intense point and at its end, rather than the average of every moment. That's why a vacation that ended with a beautiful sunset might be remembered more fondly than one that was objectively more fun but ended with a missed flight. Your brain isn't a fair recorder of events. It's more like a storyteller with a flair for drama and a weakness for happy endings. Cognitive dissonance is another slippery character. It describes the uncomfortable tension that arises when your beliefs and behaviours are out of sync. To reduce that tension, your brain might change your beliefs to match your actions. If you go out of your way to do something unpleasant, you might convince yourself it was worthwhile just to make the effort feel justified. This is partly why people become more loyal to groups or ideas they've suffered for. The brain wants consistency, and if it can't change the action, it'll change the story. Groupthink is a social version of many of these biases rolled into one. When people in a group prioritize harmony over accuracy, they may suppress dissenting opinions and avoid critical thinking. This can lead to poor decisions, missed warning signs, and a false sense of consensus. The desire to belong can sometimes override the desire to be right. You nod along with the group, even when your gut says something's off. We're wired to conform. It kept us from getting exiled from the tribe. But it doesn't always serve truth. Despite all these blind spots, there's no reason to be discouraged. In fact, the very act of recognizing them is a kind of superpower. Knowing that your brain is susceptible to biases gives you a better chance to catch them in the act. You might still make flawed decisions, but you'll be making them with a little more awareness, a little more grace. And it's not just about catching yourself, it's about being gentler with others too. When someone makes a poor judgment or clings to a mistaken belief, it might not be because they're foolish or stubborn. It might just be that they're human, navigating a complex world with a brain that evolved more for survival than for perfect logic. In the end, our minds are both our greatest tools and our greatest mysteries. They're capable of art, science, language, empathy, and also of confirmation bias, logical fallacies, and wildly misplaced confidence. The same system that composes symphonies can also insist that horoscopes are eerily accurate. And perhaps that's what makes the brain so endlessly fascinating. It's not perfect, but it's creative. It's not always rational, but it's resourceful. It may not always see things clearly, but it keeps trying. Like a well-meaning friend who occasionally gets lost on the way to the grocery store, your brain is doing its best with the information it has. Sometimes it needs a gentle nudge, sometimes it needs a good laugh, but always it's learning. Always it's adapting, and always it's wonderfully, irreversibly human. There's something a little strange about being human, and it's this. We tend to assume that our version of reality is the only version of reality, that what we see, hear, taste, and feel is more or less what everyone else experiences, and that the universe, broadly speaking, looks the way we see it. But in truth, our perception is just one tiny window into a vast and varied world, tailored by evolution to meet our specific needs, filtered through the quirks of our nervous system, and shaped by our personal history. There are entire layers of reality that we simply can't access because we're not built to, and we're not alone in that limitation. Enter the idea of the Umwelt, a term coined by biologist Jakob von Uexküll in the early 20th century. It refers to the unique sensory world experienced by each organism. Every creature on Earth lives inside its own bubble of perception, constructed from the information it's able to gather. A bat, a dog, a fish, a bee, each one perceives a different version of the world shaped by its biology. The bat uses echolocation to see in sound. The dog's nose can detect smells at concentrations 100 million times lower than a human's. The bee sees ultraviolet patterns on flowers that we can't even imagine. They all live on the same planet we do, but their realities are vastly different. Even within our own species, perception varies more than we often realise. People with colour blindness experience the visual world in a subtly altered palette. Those with synesthesia may taste words or see colours when they hear music. Individuals with autism may process sensory input in ways that feel overwhelming or unusually detailed. The brain doesn't provide a single, fixed model of the world. It crafts a version that works well enough for each individual. But let's zoom out for a moment and appreciate just how limited the standard human Umwelt really is. Our eyes, for example, are sensitive to only a tiny sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum. We call this narrowband visible light, which is a bit optimistic considering how much we don't see. We can't detect infrared light, which snakes use to track warm-blooded prey. We can't see ultraviolet, which butterflies use to find mates. We can't perceive X-rays, gamma rays, microwaves or radio waves without external tools. Our vision is impressive, for us, but it's hardly comprehensive. Sound is another area where our perception is modest. The average human ear can detect frequencies between about 20 Hz and 20,000 Hz. But elephants communicate using infrasound, with frequencies below the human range, which can travel long distances through the ground. Bats and dolphins, meanwhile, use ultrasound, frequencies well above what we can hear, to navigate and hunt. These animals don't just have better hearing, they live in soundscapes that are invisible to us. Smell is perhaps the most underrated sense when it comes to our limited awareness. Humans have roughly 400 types of olfactory receptors, which sounds like a lot until you consider that dogs have over 1,000. A trained bloodhound can track a scent trail that's several days old, across miles of terrain, while we might not even notice the smell of rain unless it's especially strong. Dogs live in a world painted with scent trails, invisible to us but as meaningful to them as landmarks are to us. Even touch, which feels immediate and reliable, is far from absolute. Some animals, like star-nosed moles or certain species of fish, can detect tiny electrical fields generated by other living beings. This ability, known as electroreception, allows them to sense their prey even in complete darkness or murky water. Sharks can detect electrical impulses from the beating hearts of nearby fish. Platypuses use electroreception to find worms hiding in muddy riverbeds. We have no such sense. To them, the world is buzzing with signals we can't even detect. Then there's magnetoreception, the ability to sense Earth's magnetic field. Birds, sea turtles, and even some bacteria use this sense to navigate across vast distances. Migratory birds are particularly impressive, managing to travel thousands of miles with remarkable accuracy. Humans, for the most part, rely on maps, compasses, and arguments about who missed the turn. If we do have any kind of magnetoreceptive sense, it's extremely subtle, possibly more subconscious than useful. What all this means is that our experience of reality is deeply biased by the kinds of information our brains are able to process. We see what evolution has made us good at seeing. We hear what we need to survive and communicate. Our senses are tuned not for truth, but for function. Nature doesn't care if we experience the full richness of the universe. It only cares that we do well enough to eat, mate, and avoid falling into holes. This doesn't mean our version of reality is wrong exactly. It just means it's incomplete. Imagine trying to understand a symphony after hearing only one instrument, or watching a movie with the brightness turned all the way down. That's the human condition. We get a beautiful but partial picture, and we build our understanding of the world on that foundation. Fortunately, our brains come with one amazing workaround: imagination. Even though our senses are limited, we can build tools that extend them. Telescopes let us see light from galaxies billions of light years away. Microscopes open up the world of bacteria and cells. Radio antennas catch whispers from the stars. Infrared cameras show us heat. And brain scanners reveal the ghostly flickers of neural activity that underlie thought itself. Through science and technology, we've built extensions of our own senses. They allow us to peer beyond the boundaries of our umwelt, to explore realities that no unaided human could ever witness. In a way, we've become like sensory symbionts, pairing our brains with machines to expand our view of the universe, and that expansion is humbling. The more we discover, the more we realize how much there is that we can't detect directly. There's something both thrilling and a little dizzying about this. We live our entire lives on a narrow ridge of perception, surrounded on all sides by the vastness of the unknown. The world we think of as normal is just one possibility among countless others. To a bee, a flower glows with ultraviolet patterns. To a snake, the same flower radiates warmth. To us, it's just a colour and a scent. Which version is real? Arguably all of them. Each species sees the world as it needs to, carving out a unique sliver of reality based on its tools and needs. The more you think about it, the more reality starts to feel less like a single, objective truth, and more like a mosaic. Millions of different experiences layered over the same basic world. Imagine a planet teeming with overlapping sensory maps, each tailored to a different way of life. That's what Earth is. We're not just sharing space with other species, we're sharing it with entirely different worlds of perception. Even within humans, culture and language can shape perception in subtle ways. Some languages have more words for colours than others. Some cultures emphasise different spatial relationships, like using cardinal directions instead of left and right. These differences can influence how people think and remember. In one study, people who use north, south, east and west in everyday speech were better at staying oriented in unfamiliar places because they were constantly tracking direction. Other research has shown that learning new ways to label sensations can change how you experience them. Wine tasters, for instance, don't necessarily taste more than the average person. They've just trained their brains to notice and name specific flavour notes. The more vocabulary you have for a sensation, the richer your perception of it becomes. Words give structure to experience, helping the brain carve meaning out of the raw material of the senses. This idea that language, culture and biology all shape what we perceive highlights just how slippery reality can be. It's not fixed. It's built moment by moment out of sensory input, memory and expectation. And that's not a weakness. It's an incredible strength. It means the brain is flexible, capable of constructing a wide range of realities depending on what's needed. It also means we have to be cautious, because if your brain is always building reality from scratch, it's also vulnerable to distortion. You might assume you're seeing the world clearly, when in fact you're only seeing what your senses allow, and your mind expects. Awareness of those limits can make you more curious, more humble, and maybe even a little more compassionate. Everyone is walking through a different version of the world, and some of those versions are invisible to us but no less real. So the next time you look out at the world, try to remember that you're peeking through a narrow keyhole. A beautiful one, yes, but just one of many. The world around you is not static, objective, or complete. It is filtered, interpreted, and edited on the fly. What you think of as reality is a collaboration between your senses, your brain, and your history. You don't see the universe, you see a version of it. And that version is just right for you, but it's not the only one. There's something incredibly freeing in that thought. You don't have to hold your experience as the ultimate truth. You can explore, wonder, and stretch the edges of your own awareness. You can learn about bees and bats and blind cavefish, and realize that the world is so much more than what meets the eye, or the ear, or the tongue, or the fingertips. Reality is not a single story told one way. It's a collection of voices, perspectives, and sensory maps. And in the grand chorus of perception, your voice is just one beautiful note. Not the whole song, but a vital part of it. Time is one of those things that seems simple until you start thinking about it. A clock ticks, the sun rises and sets, you get older, things change. Easy enough, right? But the moment you really pause and start poking at it, time reveals itself as a profoundly weird, bendable and deeply personal phenomenon. It's something we all experience, but not in the same way, not even close. Physicists will tell you that time is a dimension, much like space. In Einstein's theory of relativity, time and space are woven together into a single fabric called space-time. And according to that theory, time doesn't tick along at the same rate for everyone. If you're moving very fast or you're near a massive object like a planet or black hole, time slows down for you relative to someone else. This isn't science fiction. It's been measured. Astronauts on the International Space Station age a tiny bit more slowly than people on Earth, thanks to time dilation. The difference is minuscule, but it's real. That's time on a cosmic scale. But the strangeness doesn't end with physics. Inside your head, time gets even messier. Because your brain doesn't have a dedicated clock the way it has ears or eyes. There's no single timekeeping centre that ticks off seconds like a metronome. Instead, your experience of time is a construction, a feeling, pieced together from memory, attention, emotion, and sensory input. In fact, your brain is constantly estimating the passage of time using a combination of cues, how much information it's processing, how much has happened, how predictable or unpredictable things feel. And because these factors are fluid, your perception of time is wildly flexible. Minutes can stretch or vanish depending on the context. Everyone has had the experience of time dragging. Waiting in line, stuck in traffic, or sitting through a dull lecture can make a few minutes feel eternal. This happens because your brain has little new or interesting information to process. Without novelty to anchor time, your internal clock seems to slow down. You become more aware of the passage of time itself, and that attention makes the seconds feel heavier. On the other hand, when you're deeply engaged, laughing with friends, watching a great movie, or getting lost in a creative project, hours can pass without you noticing. Psychologists call this state flow, and it's one of the most enjoyable ways to experience time. In flow, your sense of self recedes, distractions fade, and you stop tracking time altogether. Ironically, it's only afterward that you realise how much time has passed. During the experience, time becomes irrelevant. Your age also plays a big role in how you perceive time. For children, days can feel long and summers stretch forever, but as you get older, the years seem to fly by. One popular explanation for this is the proportional theory of time perception. When you're 5 years old, 1 year is a fifth of your life, a huge chunk. When you're 50, 1 year is just a 50th. Each passing year becomes a smaller fraction of your total experience, and subjectively, that makes it feel shorter. But it's not just about proportion, it's also about novelty. New experiences create rich memories, and those memories make time feel full and expansive in retrospect. Think of a year when you moved to a new place, started a new job, or travelled a lot. Chances are that year feels longer in hindsight than a year filled with routine. Your brain encodes novel experiences more vividly, which gives the illusion that more time has passed. This is why vacations, while brief, often feel substantial in your memory. This dynamic also explains why time can feel like it speeds up when life gets predictable. When each day blends into the next with no standout events, the brain doesn't lay down strong memory traces. Later, when you look back, it's as if the time barely happened at all. That's one reason people often say that time speeds up as they age. Not because the days are shorter, but because fewer novel experiences are being stored with vivid detail. Emotion plays a powerful role too. High-stress moments can make time feel both fast and slow, depending on how you're paying attention. In a sudden emergency, like a car accident, people often report that everything seemed to move in slow motion. One explanation for this is that the brain, under threat, ramps up attention and encoding. You remember more detail, and that extra detail makes the moment seem longer in hindsight. Interestingly, actual time perception during the event doesn't change much. It's the memory of it that stretches. Conversely, fear and anxiety can compress your perception of time while you're waiting. If you're nervous about a test result or a difficult conversation, a short wait can feel like an eternity. Your brain, primed for something unpleasant, keeps checking in, asking, "Is it here yet?" The repeated mental checking makes the experience feel longer, even if the clock hasn't budged much. Sleep also has a strange relationship with time. When you fall asleep, hours vanish in what feels like an instant. You lie down, close your eyes, and suddenly it's morning. But dreams, those wild, vivid simulations, often feel like they stretch across hours, even if they only last a few minutes in real time. Some researchers believe this is because the brain in REM sleep processes information differently, creating the illusion of extended duration. The normal markers of time, external stimuli, conscious thought, physical movement, are largely absent, so your dream brain fills in the gaps. There's also a curious phenomenon called chronostasis. You may have experienced this when glancing at a clock and noticing that the second hand seems to freeze for a beat. What's happening is that your brain fills in the visual gap from the eye movement with a mental placeholder, making the first moment of your gaze appear to last longer than it actually does. It's a little illusion created by the brain's need to maintain a seamless narrative of time, even when the data is momentarily missing. In fact, your brain is constantly smoothing out your perception of time, stitching together sensory inputs and internal processes into something that feels continuous and flowing. But it's not actually real time in the way you might assume. There's always a small lag, usually a few hundred milliseconds, between when something happens and when you consciously experience it. Your brain is running a little behind, buffering reality like a cautious video stream. But instead of showing you that delay, it edits things so they feel instant. This delay becomes particularly interesting when different senses are involved. Sound and sight, for example, travel at different speeds and are processed in different parts of the brain. Yet when someone claps their hands, you perceive the sight and sound as occurring simultaneously. Your brain synchronizes them, compensating for delays so that reality feels cohesive. It's a delicate balancing act, and most of the time, it works flawlessly. Unless, of course, it doesn't. If you've ever watched a video where the sound is out of sync with the picture, even by a tiny margin, it can be maddening. Your brain relies on that temporal alignment to make sense of what's happening. When it's off, the illusion of real time falls apart, and you become suddenly aware of the machinery behind perception. Disorders of time perception can be especially revealing. In certain neurological or psychiatric conditions, time can seem to speed up, slow down, or even stop. Some people with depression report that time feels like it's dragging endlessly, while those with mania may feel that time is racing ahead. People with schizophrenia may experience disordered timing in speech or action, making the world feel unpredictable or fragmented. These disruptions highlight just how much your sense of time depends on brain chemistry and neural rhythm. Some substances can also shift time perception dramatically. Psychedelic drugs like LSD or psilocybin often distort the sense of time, making minutes feel like hours or vice versa. These effects likely stem from changes in how information is processed and integrated across the brain. Under the influence of such substances, the usual filters and rhythms are altered, revealing how fragile the illusion of steady time really is. Even meditation can stretch or compress time. Experienced meditators sometimes report that time feels slower, more expansive, or even irrelevant during deep practice. This may be due to changes in attention and awareness. When you're focused on the present moment, not anticipating or remembering, the experience of time can dissolve. You're not measuring it anymore, you're simply being in it. And that may be the most curious aspect of all, our constant urge to measure, manage, and track time, despite it being something we don't fully understand. We slice it into hours and minutes, we plan it, sell it, and wish for more of it. Yet the experience of time is always personal, always subjective, always filtered through the lens of a very human brain. What we call time isn't just something outside us, ticking away like a metronome. It's something our brains are actively constructing, interpreting, smoothing, stretching, and squeezing. It changes depending on where we are, how we feel, what we're doing, and what we remember. Time isn't just on the clock, it's in the mind. And the mind, as we've seen, is a highly creative editor. So even if the seconds on your watch march forward with perfect precision, your internal time is a different beast altogether. It dances, skips, meanders, and occasionally takes a nap. And that's part of what makes being human so interesting. We don't just measure time, we feel it. And in feeling it, we shape the story of our lives. There's a peculiar paradox at the heart of being human. On one hand, you're this squishy biology-based creature navigating the world with your senses and thoughts and feelings. On the other hand, you're also a meaning-making machine, constantly weaving stories, assigning significance and trying to figure out what it all means. We aren't just conscious, we're conscious that we're conscious. We wonder about our purpose, our identity, and whether the universe has anything resembling a plan for us, or whether we're just a clever accident on a rock spinning through space. Meaning, in this context, isn't just philosophical musing. It's a core feature of how the brain operates. You seek patterns, you look for connections, and you interpret the world not as a series of disconnected facts, but as a coherent, meaningful narrative. This is your brain's default mode. It doesn't like randomness. It wants structure, even when none exists. Which is how we end up finding constellations in the stars, metaphors in the weather, and symbolism in our soup. Much of this meaning-making process is rooted in pattern recognition. The brain is extraordinarily good at spotting patterns, so good in fact that it often finds them where none actually exist. This tendency is called apophenia, and it's responsible for everything from conspiracy theories to your uncanny ability to hear your name being called in a noisy crowd. Your brain is always scanning for the signal amidst the noise, and if it can't find a signal, it will invent one. This is not a bug in the system, it's a feature. A hyperactive pattern detector may lead to the occasional false alarm, but it also gives you the creative flexibility to imagine, hypothesize, and make leaps of intuition that a more rigid system might miss. Humans are also uniquely equipped with what's sometimes called a narrative instinct. You don't just see events, you turn them into stories. Even your own memories aren't stored as neutral recordings. They're shaped into narratives with causes and effects, heroes and villains, climaxes and resolutions. Your brain connects the dots to form meaning, and then it tells you a story about yourself and the world. That story may be inspiring, comforting, tragic, or utterly confusing, but it's yours, and it feels true. This sense of narrative isn't limited to personal memories. It stretches into every corner of human culture. Myths, legends, religions, novels, movies, history books. They're all systems of meaning that help us explain our place in the universe. They organize chaos. They give context to suffering. They provide frameworks for ethics, behavior, and belonging. A story can tell you where you came from, what you're supposed to do, and why it matters. Neuroscientists have even begun to explore what happens in the brain when we engage with stories. When you read or hear a compelling narrative, your brain activates many of the same areas that would be involved if you were actually experiencing those events. If a character runs, your motor cortex lights up. If someone feels pain, your insular and anterior cingulate, regions involved in emotional empathy, do the same. This is called neural coupling, and it explains why stories can feel so vivid, so transporting. They aren't just entertainment. They're simulations of reality, run inside your mind. The construction of meaning isn't purely abstract. It has real, measurable effects on health and well-being. People who report a strong sense of purpose tend to live longer, experience lower rates of depression, and recover more quickly from illness. This isn't magic, it's biology. Purpose engages your motivation systems. It helps regulate stress. It gives you a reason to get out of bed, to connect with others, to persist through adversity. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, famously wrote that those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. That idea is now supported by decades of psychological research, but meaning doesn't always arise from the extraordinary. More often than not, it's found in the small, ordinary things: a quiet cup of tea, a shared laugh, a project that matters to you. It's a sense of coherence, of knowing where you are and what you're doing, even if just for a moment. It doesn't require cosmic insight or spiritual awakening, though those certainly count. It can emerge from daily rituals, personal goals, or the simple act of caring for someone else. That said, the human drive for meaning can sometimes lead us astray. In our quest to make sense of suffering, we may blame ourselves or others for things beyond anyone's control. We may search for answers in patterns that aren't real, or adopt rigid belief systems that resist contradiction. The same machinery that helps us find beauty and order can also reinforce prejudice, superstition, or fear. Meaning is a double-edged sword. It can heal, but it can also confine. This tension is especially clear when we face uncertainty. The brain dislikes uncertainty. It sees it as a threat. Ambiguity makes planning difficult. It increases anxiety. That's why we often prefer a bad explanation to no explanation at all. It's why conspiracy theories flourish in times of crisis, and why superstitions emerge when control is lacking. If the world feels chaotic, any story is better than none. It gives the illusion of predictability, of cause and effect. The brain's response to uncertainty is rooted in its architecture. The amygdala, which processes threat and fear, becomes more active when outcomes are ambiguous. The prefrontal cortex, which helps weigh evidence and reason through problems, works to resolve the tension, but it takes effort, and sometimes emotion wins. This is why beliefs formed under stress can be especially stubborn. They're emotionally sticky. They come with a sense of urgency, and the brain locks them in tightly to reduce future ambiguity. Despite these challenges, the search for meaning remains one of the most defining features of our species. We ask questions that no other creature does. Why am I here? What happens after I die? What does it all mean? These aren't just intellectual exercises. They're deeply emotional, existential queries that shape how we live, how we love, and how we face loss. Interestingly, some researchers suggest that meaning itself might be more fundamental than we think, not just a byproduct of consciousness, but one of its driving forces. Philosopher and cognitive scientist John Vervaeke argues that humans are not just problem solvers, but relevance realizers, beings constantly scanning the environment for what matters. According to this view, consciousness evolved not just to help us survive, but to help us navigate an ever-shifting world of relationships, intentions, and opportunities. Meaning is not the icing on the cake of cognition, it's baked into the recipe. This might also help explain the allure of awe. When we witness something vast or beautiful, a starry night, a thunderstorm, a piece of music that sends shivers down your spine, we often feel a sense of wonder that's hard to describe. Awe temporarily dissolves the boundaries of the self. It connects us to something larger, and crucially, it can shift our focus away from our problems, allowing us to see ourselves as part of a broader, more intricate picture. Awe is deeply tied to meaning. It reminds us that there is more to existence than our immediate concerns, that we're part of something that stretches beyond our grasp. And while awe doesn't provide answers, it changes the frame in which we ask the questions. It opens the door to humility, curiosity, and a kind of reverent uncertainty. In moments of awe, or deep love, or grief, or gratitude, we touch something that doesn't quite fit inside the boundaries of logic. And maybe that's the point. The brain is good at solving puzzles, but it's just as good at appreciating mysteries. Meaning doesn't always arrive as a clear solution. Sometimes it's a sensation, a resonance, a quiet yes in response to something you can't quite name. None of this means we should abandon reason or evidence. On the contrary, part of what makes us remarkable is our ability to balance both, the rational and the emotional, the analytical and the poetic. We can use science to understand the mechanisms of the brain and still cherish the experience of listening to a symphony or watching the sunrise. We can know how emotions are generated and still be moved by them. Meaning isn't opposed to understanding. It is understanding, of a different kind. And in the end, perhaps meaning is less about discovering some grand, universal truth, and more about building a life that feels coherent, connected, and alive. A life where your actions matter to someone, where your presence brings warmth, where the little things, the ones that don't make headlines, add up to something quietly extraordinary. Meaning isn't necessarily waiting to be found in a distant temple or a hidden code. It might already be here, in the way you notice beauty, the questions you ask, the stories you share. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask the questions again and again with openness and heart. The human brain, for all its neural circuitry and evolutionary wiring, is also a vessel for wonder. And if that isn't meaningful, it's hard to say what is. And here we are, after drifting through neurons and narratives, senses and simulations, illusions and insights. We've explored how the brain builds your reality piece by piece, not by recording the world exactly as it is, but by constructing a rich, dynamic version that makes just enough sense to keep you going. It filters, edits, guesses, fills in the blanks, and serves it all up with such confidence that you rarely question it. But perhaps now, with a bit more awareness, you do question it. Not in a way that makes the world feel less real, but in a way that makes it feel even more wondrous. Because understanding that your reality is an illusion, not a deception, but a creation, invites a different kind of appreciation. One that makes room for curiosity, flexibility, and the gentle acceptance that not everything has to be fully known to be deeply felt. We began this journey with a few simple human questions. Who are you? What is this thing we call reality? And how can a 3-pound bundle of cells in your skull possibly make sense of a universe so vast and strange? Maybe now those questions feel a little different. Not fully answered, because how could they be? But expanded, enriched. Maybe they've become less like puzzles and more like companions. Questions to carry with you, not solve and shelve. Because in the end, the illusion of reality is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. The ever-shifting dance of perception, memory, consciousness, and meaning is what gives your life texture and depth. It's what lets you marvel at the stars, laugh with friends, cry at stories, and find purpose in the ordinary. So as you rest your eyes and drift towards sleep, perhaps let those same questions float gently in the background, like distant constellations in the sky of the mind. Who are you? What is reality? And how somehow do you know that you know? Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed this journey through the illusions and intricacies of the mind, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Sleep well, curious mind.